everybody. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our lecture for Engineering 101. Today we had the great pleasure of having the Executive Dean of Engineering present to you guys. So as first years, you get to hear straight from the mouth of Saurabh. He's going to talk to you about sustainability, specifically the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, or UN SDGs. So thank you and welcome, Saurabh.
Kia ora, thank you, Sierra. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Saurabh tōku ingoa no Afrika ki te tonga ahu, ko amamatua ahu kei te kaupe kapuhanga no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Saurabh. I serve, as Sierra has introduced, as Dean, but I am here to present a discussion on sustainability and innovation. Looking forward to it. I hope you are too. And firstly, I will provide just two images for you to take a quick pause on and think about these images just a bit. You'll notice the first image from Apollo 8. And this image is an image of Earthrise, and it was taken on the eve of Christmas, 1968. And it was the first image. And if you look at the image, you will notice that it's an image that shows the moon and the lack of life on moon, and on the other, and lack of color on moon. And when it visions the Earth or looks at the Earth, you see the more colorful picture of the Earth. Reflecting the vulnerability that we have as a planet. The second image is that of the Earth, which was taken in Apollo 10. Apollo 9 just went around the Earth, so Apollo 10. And this then shows the more connected nature that we have as a globe. And these two images propelled the first conversations around the environment as well as economic limits, with some initial conferences taking place in the early 1970s. This is a quotation which you can read. Basically, I'll say it, in a few decades, the relationship between the environment, resources, and conflict may seem as obvious as the connection we see today between human rights, democracy, and peace. And part of this discussion is about the connectedness that we have. So the plan is to contextualize sustainability, sustainable development in the context of why it becomes more relevant, and then moving over to a problem statement that comes out of this, and then a solutions toolkit. I call it a toolkit. I hope that and I know you've gone to several lectures before and after, probably today and in the week. This particular presentation, the main takeaway is just one slide. There are multiple slides, and I will pause and make sure you take note of that particular slide. It is a slide that presents a framework, which will be valuable, I believe, for you, not just now, but also in the future, in your career, in other parts of life that you will have. So that's where it would be. And then I'll have a short commercial break, and then we'll have the summary. By the way, I should just give you the heads up that I did commit to a commercial break before, and I forgot to do it. So, that happens too if we run out of time, but hopefully not. So on sustainability, as I mentioned and sketched this picture, that in early 70s, the conversation started to come about that it wasn't a limitation that economic growth can take place, but whether it should, and if it should, then should it be at the same pace? And if it should be at the same pace, what is the cost of that growth to other parts of the planet? So the Prime Minister of Norway in the early 80s was appointed, Brundtland was appointed to lead a commission to look into this. And in 1987, she produced the report, and the commission produced the report, which is visible if you're interested. The full book is also available through the library, defining sustainability as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. You will notice that sustainability and later sustainable development does have some difference in meanings, and it also depends on the references you're looking at. In our own context, the university has its values, and the values, one of them is about Tiakitanga, which is about resource management. And these values presented in this triangle, at the center of it is Utu, which also references to reciprocity. I know it can have alternative meanings, but in this context also to balance, and in a way has got that central feeling within that triangle. You would notice, and I moved over, if you may have noticed from my mihi, that I mentioned that I'm from Africa, I'm from South Africa, and you would have noticed that I do in the mihi, the greetings 3 times, and the 3 of the past, the present, and the future is one rationale which I have appreciated when I moved, and you will notice the 3s in the triangle too. And so that's often, I felt it's a good way of thinking about sustainability as the cultural values are looking at things not only about a single generation, but intergenerationally. And I think that is a difference of how sustainability would be looked at, say, 30, 40 years ago, as whether you can have measures for one particular generation. Now you realize that actually one generation has to be a key enabler to others. So the next couple of slides are going around the world, and these slides are about setting the context of how the world has changed. And most of this you will know, but it's just to take you through the field. I'll go through them fairly quickly. I was realizing, and I was just mentioning to Sierra, because Tim was presenting here before, and he's got this ability of going, you know when you're watching YouTube, and you have shorts, and you scroll through them, and I'm realizing that some of you might be seated there, and you must be thinking, okay, how am I going to scroll through this person in front of me? So you probably have that feel. So the next couple of slides will go in that direction of moving a little fast. But the global transportation system, if you take note of this image, the world is connected quite closely. Is the white lines are the air flights, blue in the shipment. However, much more vulnerable. A few years ago, I was traveling in Europe, and a volcanic ash in part of northeastern Europe meant that flights couldn't take off. And another vulnerability that was more recent in 2021, it was during COVID, so you may have taken note of it, was the Ever Given ship trying to go through the Suez Canal near Egypt, and it stopped. And when that happened, it basically had something called a bank effect. So the ship goes horizontal, and then the path is blocked for other ships. And that happened for 6 days. And that particular path is a key connector between Asia, our part of the world, and Europe. And so the shipment takes place in this part of, I don't know if I'll get that. Oh, there it is. In the top part of Africa. So what the key point here is that a vulnerability in one part of the world quickly expands its impact around the world and has significant impact on how transportation. So the takeaway here is that we're dealing with networks and complex systems when we think about the globe in a big way. This theme will then go on with a couple of the next slides. So this is the human brain, again, complex system. Another complex system is the metabolic metro map. If you look at Netflix, for example, more recent movie about the London bombing incident in early 2000 and how it had a huge impact very quickly on operations, not only in London, but in the whole of England. Similarly, here you see another example of a complex system. This is the cable data connectivity, and you will notice that there are redundancy. You will notice where New Zealand is. There's a couple of redundancy that's there, but there is an impact if one of these cables get get broke. This is more on a lighter note, that sometimes things like this can happen too. Sharks like some of these cables, but most of them are protected, so don't worry too much about it, but those things do happen. But again, you can see vulnerabilities in the system. Another example here is the cross-border banking. This is a story that some of you may not be that aware of, but in 2008, there was a global financial crisis, and it was triggered by a company or banking system, financial system called Lehman Brothers. This organization had started in 1850, major investment into mortgages, into housing, and that whole industry collapsed. And when that happened, it happened 2 days after the leaders of the company had thought that the company was going in the right direction. So quite unexpected, suddenly, but something happened in one system in one part of the world that had then an implication on the whole globe. And that then led to a huge financial crisis. So you've looked at a couple of these examples, and so I'll pause here a bit and ask a question. So what are some of the ways in which we are connected? And some examples you've seen, there may be others. So just pausing here. Any ideas on what are some of the ways that we are connected? Anyone wants to take? Yep. Trade. Yeah, other examples? Trade is a good one, quite recent. More hands? Looking up. See, this is the problem now. I'm not kicked out, have no names now. Go ahead. Tourism, yep. Other examples? Yep. Politically, yep. Other examples? Remember what you say, you will remember. So this is an opportunity. Other areas in how we're connected? Kai, you might be right. You want to take a try? You might have just communicated, yep. Yeah, that could be values, could be a connecting point too. Yep. Other areas of connection? So some of the examples are exactly the ones you have mentioned. Digital and technological connectivity, trade and economic interdependence, environment, cultural, that came up in the values one, geopolitically, security links, global transportation and supply chains is another instance. So these are some of the ways in which we're connected, and there are probably others. And if there are implications or changes to policy in one part of the world, whether we like it or not, it will have an impact on us here. So, so again, you can see the networks and complex systems. So the first conclusion from these slides that you've seen is that our deep interconnectedness means that in the context of engineering, how do we chart a course for a sustainable future? Recognizing these vulnerabilities, and this complex systems are now overlaid with the global megatrends. And these global megatrends include areas such as impactful technology. We've seen the areas of appropriate usage of artificial intelligence, which Sierra would have spoken to you about a few days ago, accelerating individualization, demographic, and the other aspects of economic power shifts. And if you just look at the demographic change, this is a picture of the world of what it could look if it was represented in terms of population changes. So I'll give you 2 data points so that you can think about it. One data point is if you look at the population of Europe in 1950 relative to the global population was close to 22. It was 22%, and on the medium prediction for 2100, it's going to be 6%. And if you look at the population in Africa, the population of Africa in 1950 relative to the global population was 9%. And again, on the medium growth, it's looking to be 39% in 2100. So that's a huge change, isn't it? That's a huge shift. And that immediately repositions our thinking that somebody mentioned values and culture. Do we know how these different parts of the world work? Because you and people after you will have an engagement with this changing world. We have seen, all of us have experienced COVID, and we've also experienced that during COVID, we had a major health crisis, and at the same time, we also had the biggest digital transformation that has ever taken place, the acceleration, the Zoom effect. I know it's zoom in and zoom out, but and these are some of the other pictures, and some, I think this was actually drawn even prior to the, during the COVID period, but the aspect of recession, again, COVID similarly was the Spanish flu in 1918, and that had then come up. And so you do see some re-representation of how things had been. So as a university, our approach also changes, and we're guided by Engineering New Zealand, and Engineering New Zealand is a signatory of a wider global group. And three things have come about in this that we have to pay attention on. One is the appropriate usage of AI. Second is the engineer in the world, a new graduate attribute that you will experience during your journey in the next 3 years. And then the diversity and inclusion, and you've seen some rationale around that, including some of the mega trends and its contribution to building excellent teams. I won't go into this as a bit of bureaucracy. Then on the second conclusion, which is, I mentioned at the outset that we'll come to a point where there will be a takeaway, which is where I'm getting at soon, that there are four lenses that enable us to look at problems in a way that we're able to get a good feel of these. So The Age of Sustainable Development by Jeffrey Sachs. Jeffrey Sachs used to be the advisor to the Secretary General since almost pre-2000. So the different world development goals that came about, he had a major hand in, and I'll present some of the material from this text. And one of the things that comes across is, and imagine if you're driving and you change, from glasses to shades because you get a better and different picture. And so the lenses that are being presented here are lenses that you can use on different scenarios, and you can switch and swap these lenses to get different pictures of this problem that you're looking at, and that then enables one to design solutions which are more holistic. These four lenses are they're in the order that you can see. Well, they're not in any particular order, but techno-economics, social dynamics, earth systems, and geopolitics. I personally have a mnemonic that I use to remember this. You might want to take note of that. It's not official, it's not in the book, but GETS as geopolitics, earth systems, or environment, techno-economics, and social dynamics. Sometimes societal dynamics, but there are variances, but these are the four lenses that are often useful in looking at these problems. So I've got this picture here, again, changing those lenses, you get a different view of the particular problem. And sometimes when you look at a solution, it doesn't make sense, but then when you start looking at it from these multiple lenses, it might start making a different sense. It might start to make sense. Another way of thinking about it is pieces of a puzzle, that individual pieces may not give you the full picture, but together it gives you the picture. So I'll go and provide a couple examples on how these are used, and then we'll do a bit more interaction on another. So this is a case on the war in Syria. And if you look at Syria, Syria's has got a number of things, and one of them was that there was a drought period, one of the most extreme drought over a 10-year period, and that meant, so there was a drought was one. The other aspect is that there are multiple differences in societal, demographic, ethnic differences. So there was a social dynamic issue, there was an earth system issue, there was then different countries got involved in the war, and then that led to a geopolitical issue. And of course, all of this was happening when you have a drought. You also have economic implications. There's unemployment. And this then created that perfect environment for war that continues. So often when you're listening to presentations on, say, for example, Syria, you might be looking at it just one angle that might be, well, there was unemployment. Another angle was maybe there's drought. Another one is maybe it's political. But it's often a mix of things that comes together. And that's the value of these lenses is if you're using them beforehand, you do get a different picture. If you think about the COVID-19 period, again, similar things that there were, the techno-economic side of it. I talked about the digital transformation, the changes to industry that took place, the social dynamics of being isolated. What did it mean? What did it mean for teams that were less in person, hybrid organizations, and what are the takeaways that we experience now? The Earth systems had an improvement on the one end, less cars, less flights. On the other hand, our data that flights were collecting also reduced, so you have less ability to get better information. And of course, there was geopolitical migration patterns changed during that period. Many universities in our environment, the UK, the universities in Canada, Australia, they had a big change. International students and their contribution to international students shifted because of simply the migration patterns. And so again, if you look at that, you obviously have a big health crisis, but the support of techno-economics, it was the first time ever that you had a genomic sequence being shared initially over a social media to get information out to multiple people so that we as a global community can work on finding and formulating a solution. So that's the instance of COVID-19. Actually, I wanted us to do that as a group activity, but we can do the AI one instead as a group activity. So do you have your phones to do a QR scan on this? And you shouldn't repeat this in an exam, but I'll change the question. And the question would be on using these 4 lenses to evaluate AI. In case you didn't get the link or it didn't work, then just take a picture. Oh, well, these slides are available. So, and if you take the link down, are you all ready? Can I move to the next? You all good? Nod if you're good. Good. See the nods. Good. Okay. So if you think about this case study, we talked about COVID. So we're doing this one on artificial intelligence. And so the evaluate COVID-19 is evaluate AI. Are you on the form? Any problems accessing the form? All good? Okay, so look at AI from the lens of Earth systems, or as it is on the form. I guess I probably have geopolitics first, and enter what you might think are the geopolitical elements and Earth systems. As you're doing that, if I'm online, it'll work. Okay, the advantage of this approach is you don't have to raise your hands. And I haven't asked you your name. That's a disadvantage. Okay. Geopolitics and AI. You're entering a couple of things. I know typing is slow. You'd rather want to click and speak in it, right? Okay. Can I move on? I'm not seeing there's one response submitted. Maybe you're working on the others. technoeconomics, good and bad. I did this with another group, and they had AI just like you do. And I said, what is AI? Is it AI evaluating AI? And I said, yep. And then I said, what was it? That was evaluating the university. And someone said AI stands for academic integrity. Okay, so it's developing. 9 responses. I know there are more than 9 people, but okay, you're doing probably different ones. So you can see in the oh, you can't see this. Sorry. Sorry, this is what I was looking at. So that's looking at the geopolitics. You can see competitive development. I didn't see trade there. You could have said trade tariffs. Advanced AI, bias in opinion. Okay, so you can see that's coming up. So you can get a feel for geopolitics, competitive development. And then if you look at AI from a techno-economics perspective, jobs, both plus, change, minus. When Steve Jobs was lead of AI, often there was a pun about Apple creating work, different work, and at the same time, the implications, the negative implications on jobs. Then you have production major shifts. So you can, I think you've got a good handle for what this is about. And then you have the social dynamics around AI, IP theft, people, societal behaviors, bias, cultural shifts. And then on Earth systems, the impact and sustainability. Every time you create a prompt, that has got a negative effect on it's got a negative effect because of energy consumption. Positive is that AI can also be used for energy optimization. But it does look like you're getting the hang of it. Thank you very much for multiple responses on this. So going back onto this, so you've got the case study on AI, we've done that. I need to go back on extend mode. Okay, the next set of sorry, this is doing something weird. Sorry, I'm having a user issue here. Need to get duplicate. I have a different screen versus. Let me swap it. Extend. Don't worry, if we don't resolve this, I'll talk through the stuff as well. That's okay. But it'll work. No, it doesn't. Let's change this to display settings. Nope. Escape from presentation mode. Let's create FN, F5. Okay. So AI, if you look at other examples from Christchurch, this is the Travis wetland. Travis wetland, we have an emulation of a wetland within campus. If you haven't seen that, we've got some, when post the earthquake, when the university campus was rebuilt, it was also built to have some of the filtering mechanisms. So that's an example that you would see as a solution. And when you start to use these different lenses, you start to also bring in, what, are the values of people in the way that solutions are designed. Okay, then are there other examples that you can think of from Christchurch where these 4 lenses may have been used in coming up with solutions? Any quick thoughts? Green hydrogen and the airport might be one. We have some examples within our chemical and process engineering within the university where Sierra is actually from, and that domain is looking at recovering zinc from zinc dust. And another example is at producing on-demand hydrogen from ethanol, in the conversion from ethanol to acetic acid vinegar. So there are a couple of examples that exist within the Christchurch environment that are also, the convention center that's built has been built very much on these principles of these 4 lenses as they look at sustainable environment. And yes, there's a cost implication to it, but there's a longer term recovery. So you'll come through these words on sustainability, sustainable development goals. Sometimes they're used interchangeably, and there are different definitions. Some people see sustainability as the destination. Others see sustainability as only the environment part of sustainable development. Sustainable development, some would see as a pathway, and therefore this particular picture. I guess this picture is not from New Zealand, huh? We don't have a lot of cones. But the sustainable development as a pathway, and sustainable development goals are a set of goals that the global community came together in September 2015 to launch. But prior to the sustainable development goals were the Millennium Development Goals. The Millennium Development Goals came about in the late 90s when Kofi Annan was the Secretary General of the United Nations. And what had happened in the journey was that between 1970 and 1992, when a major conference took place in Rio on the world working together on the implications on the environment of economic activity primarily, but not only economic activity, was the realization that just having the contextual discussions was insufficient, and that the global community needed to come together to formulate a set of goals that it would work together towards. And those were then the Millennium Development Goals. The Millennium Development Goals, there were 8 of them, and the ambition that was set by the community at the time was that we would target half of the world's population. And in that half of the world's population, when the focus was put forward, largely, or not all, but a number of the goals were attained. So this had a duration between 2000 and 2015, and towards 2015, some of the reflection was done on what the goals had achieved. And if you look at areas such as extreme poverty, which was a key focus of the Millennium Development Goals, there was actually extreme poverty is less than a person's living less than $1 a day, US dollars a day, had actually halved, had significantly reduced. If you look at similarly for water, which I'll show next, again, there was a big difference on people who had access to water or not. And if you look at to 1990 to 2015, the quest here around water was that at least half of the global population should have access to clean water and sanitation, and in fact that was achieved in 2015, and that was because the world was working together. Areas of health had quite a positive implication as well. Aspects such as malaria and the eradication of malaria, particularly in Africa, was achieved, and that was largely because of the Gates Foundation had put a lot of their personal money into being able to have that achievement. So the bottom line here with the Millennium Development Goals is that global community coming together, countries of the signatories of the United Nations, and saying, we'll work together towards these goals. Of course, these goals were also during a time when there were crises. So the 2008 financial crisis, the one I mentioned in the banking instance, did have an implication. So the financial contribution of the world, of countries between 2000 and 2008 was one segment, and 2008 to 2015 was another segment of how much people could contribute towards Millennium Development Goals. A bit very much like what COVID did with the next set of goals in the 2020 period. So in May to September 2015, the world came together to look at the Sustainable Development Goals with the timeline of 2030. The Sustainable Development Goals were in a set of goals that the Millennium Development Goals were often aiming at the half of the world's population, whereas the Sustainable Development Goals were much more ambitious. The aspiration was to end poverty across the world. There was an emphasis on all forms everywhere. Very inclusive. There were 17 goals, actually expanded to over 159 targets, and in fact, on indicators would be more than 250 indicators to see how the world is progressing on these goals. Now, they have a timeline for 2030, and you'll be saying we're now in 25, so where are we going to be in 2030? I think that, like with Millennium Development Goals, there was an overlap with Sustainable Development Goals, and it's very likely that those overlaps will, in fact, continue. I personally look at this chart. There are 17 goals. I try and cluster them into 5 areas. And these 5 areas for me, the first set of the areas is about people. The second set is about the planet. The third area is about productivity. So goals like number 9, which deals with industry, innovation, and infrastructure, economic growth, is about productivity. The fourth area for me is peace, which is goal number 16. And the fifth area for me is partnerships, which is an underlying that cuts across all of the goals, but reminds constantly that the strengths of different countries and the diversity of different countries and their cooperation can come together, in fact, to achieve these Sustainable Development Goals. 17 goals aiming with no poverty, zero hunger, climate action, economic growth, decent work, and those are the goals that came up. Here again, if you take this, reflect with the Millennium Development Goals, which is attained for half of the world, what does it mean for the Sustainable Development Goals in all its forms? And where it becomes a challenge is if you think about attaining for half the population, and then you think about the next 80%, it's actually doable. So you could have a centralized water system, for instance. But when it comes to that last 100%, this becomes often quite challenging because this is where you have populations dispersed and not enough people in different areas. So if you look at it only from an economic lens, you don't always know how to get there or whether it will be economically, financially feasible in making provisions for those scarce populations. So the last mile, it's called the last mile challenge in the telecommunications industry, which is an area, my own technical discipline is on 5G and 6G telecommunications. And there we have been able to solve this in a way because one is wireless and two is that you have decentralized solutions, distributed solutions for energy, which in combination has been the set of things that comes together that does help in bringing that last mile. We haven't solved it altogether. I must also recognize there are satellites and different things that are still emerging as the 5G to 6G transition will take place in the next 5 years. But a key thing here is that 80 to 100%, that last stretch can mean very high budgets. And if anyone has access to infinity budgets, let us know. We might just collaborate with the university. So as an engineering student, you might want to keep in mind that innovation often is thinking outside of the box. Sometimes they're saying that in the first, second industrial revolutions, you thought inside the box and then outside the box and then probably now without the box. But all of those ideas of looking at things differently is applicable. And just on this context of these 4 lenses, back to the 4 lenses, and your EWB project upcoming, any ideas of the, you've all been introduced, I assume, to the EWB project in Timor-Leste at this time. In Timor, any ideas, things, if you use those 4 lenses, how would it apply on whichever area, whether you're looking at water, energy, in the circular economy? Any thoughts if you had to apply the thinking? Anyone? Let's take an instance of village. The village has a chief, right? Is that a different dimension? I mean, no, I assume that not everyone has worked. When I was in South Africa, I was quite used to having a chief in some parts, multiple, with high influence. And in fact, delivering on projects where if you haven't engaged with the chief and understood how the local infrastructure works, great technology solutions did not find they were not sustained in the area. An example that comes to mind a few years ago was to have a deployment of a solar solution to deal with cooking that was causing pollution in one of the villages. And a group of students we went, and students said, well, we can solve this, let's have solar solutions. And it looked good. Technologically, everything was great. It was delivered. We went back 6 months, partly because it was a nice part and different part relative to city life, so it was good to get out there. And guess what happened to the technology? It was not used. No one was using it. And we thought, wow, great solution here. What happened? Any ideas what might have happened? Yeah? Yep. They didn't know how to use it. Yeah. I mean, they had picked up, but yeah, it was a new tool, a new apparatus. So it would be different usage. But I'll tell you, it's probably not a very easy one to guess, this one. But that particular, and I didn't give you all the context, you see. I should have given you the full context. But part of the story in the context, which we missed, was that area was a high malaria area. And mosquitoes didn't like smoke. So when it was in the previous solution delivery, when people were cooking, yes, there was pollution, but the smoke was keeping the mosquitoes away. And so when we brought the great tech, it did the cooking and things, but it took the smoke away. And it brought back the mosquitoes. And again, if we had understood and engaged with people more about looking at things in a more holistic way, we would have appreciated that the tech solution on its own, without an additional set of managing the mosquitoes, would not work. And there are several other examples. You might have heard of the example of the elevator. The slow elevator. In fact, when people said use the elevator ASAP, people said, oh, is that as slow as possible? And the elevator today, the whole thing was the speed of the elevator. Can you make it faster? And then there was safety concern. And guess how they solved that problem? Any reflections on that one? I might have given it away here. If you go into elevators, you see a mirror, do you? And the mirror gives you a spatial, and it also gives you the ability to look at yourself, and then you start to say, well, maybe it's not too bad that this is slow. And, so some of the problems are not just solved technologically, but also involving the engagement with society. So that's the view. And when you're thinking about your EWB solutions, having the idea of these 4 lenses might help you in getting to a more holistic solution. I placed this image in. This is the mountain which I must climb. It looks quite challenging at times when you have projects, especially in your first year. but it might just be this. And I hope that your journey into the project will give you this experience, if not within this semester, then during the, as you're there. Another message about impossible and its spelling gaps. I did promise you a commercial break, and I don't always get to it because I forget about it. And then you see me sometimes in a supermarket and you say, what was the commercial break that you were going to say? And then I look at this and I'm like, I don't remember. The commercial break is that if you are engaged in, I know this project is an emulation, but if you do think that you have solution viability, do consider seeking funding for it. And this is one avenue for external funding. There are new calls, so don't worry about the deadline that's expired. And this could be one funding mechanism with the university's IEEE student branch. We have examples of real success as you as students own intellectual property. And we have had cases like Mediself that has come out of of a final year project and is now a company in production. And what they do and identified as the challenge was that during COVID, the personal protection equipment in hospitals was often being used once and disposed of. And they saw that as an opportunity of how to bring about a recycling in a cost-effective way. And that then became this person's company. Oliver Hunt is the person who leads that. And that's an example of where some of these projects and the ideas that you're thinking about now and in the future could lead you into. And we obviously love that because we love to see you being successful. And we'd love to see more of those instances. And of course, the university does give you a safe environment to practice such approaches. So in summary, the key summary here is those 4 lenses. So do you remember what the 4 lenses are?
Geopolitical, social dynamics, and Earth systems.
Earth systems, yeah. So yep, those are the 4. Well done, by the way. So you can remember it. You can remember it in different ways. I remember it in you don't like GETS, which is geopolitics, Earth systems, techno-economics, and social dynamics. You can also remember it. I remember it as if I go out of the house, what happens? I meet the environment, I meet with people, the social interactions, social dynamics. And the next thing that happens is the phone comes in the way, techno-economics, cell phones, and then the aspect of, what did I miss? Geopolitics. You pick up the newspaper. Or you think about the UCSA reps that spoke earlier. So those are some of the ways that you can use. But those 4 lenses are useful, I suppose, not only in engineering, but in life things that you might be looking at engaging with. And I hope that this connection with the Sustainable Development Goals, those 17 goals, and how you think about the linkages and the threading with your project will further help you in delivering a solution that sustains in this emulation, but hopefully in future, in reality too. So with those words, thank you very much, and all the best for your project work.
Let's thank Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.